Can someone help me find my...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. For those of you who don't know me, Stephen Freeland is my name. And can you find my... Oh, do you need me?
You're there.
Beauty, thanks, buddy. Stephen Freeland is my name, and as the woman of my dreams said, I have the privilege of teaching space law in various places around the world, but also, in a sense, I'm a practitioner, in that sense, a legal practitioner. As Mark said, and by the way, before I even start, they wouldn't allow me to do it, but I really wanted to in the report that I wrote, mention by name, Mark and Roz and Alex and Anne Byrne and Jennifer Doyle, who were, delightful to work with, extraordinarily helpful, great friends, great colleagues. So we're very lucky that these people are at the helm. And I can say that because I'm not involved in this next process. I mean it with all my heart. So thank you, Mark, for all your help, and please pass that on to your colleagues. As we were driving here, Donna said to me, "What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "Look, I don't know, I'll make it up as I go." But she said, "Don't go through all that crap about law and background. This audience knows all about that." And of course, she's absolutely right. And to a certain degree, that quote-unquote crap has been covered in other talks anyway. So what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about the review. So I'll just get rid of all this stuff. Just on the legal requirements, these were mentioned. I'll come back to this. This was not by the small sat people who spoke, and for perfectly good reasons. But I will come back to this because I think this is an important issue. So at the international level, well, firstly we know that we're going to have a proliferation of small satellites, if everybody is correct. There are reports from Euroconsult, from a whole lot of consultants saying that by 2025, we're going to have tens of thousands of small satellites commercially operating. So, as Mark said, we've moved very much from that phase of, the backyard experimentalist to the university student, to the university faculty, to the, well, it's all in the journey, we don't care if it fails, and we're really moving to incredibly sophisticated uses now. Explorative and scientific, but bet your bottom dollar, commercial as well. And that is a really interesting issue because you've all heard of the expression disruptive technology. I mean, it's just a thing, right, that management consultants talk about. I never understand exactly what management consultants say, but this is a disruptive technology in the sense that it's not going to replace, if you like, big satellites, traditional satellites, but it's certainly going to augment it. It's going to add new, considerably more actors to the landscape. It's going to do a whole range of things. And big satellite operators have to react to this. We've all heard of that expression, the Kodak moment. You've all heard of that expression? Yeah, so you know the history of Kodak. When I was, you know how old I am because I'm a Sputnik baby, right? So when I was a young lad, Kodak was the thing, right? And of course the board of Kodak at some point took the decision not to react to the changing technology in terms of digitization. And who's heard of Kodak now, really, in terms of camera technology? So big satellite operators are really thinking about this. I've just been on an extraordinarily successful trip to Europe. The first 10 days I spent, I have a position at the University of Toulouse. I spent in Toulouse. Toulouse is the centre of the French space industry. France is an incredibly sophisticated industrial power in space. And I had the privilege of spending a couple of days with Airbus Defence and Space, and separately with Thales Alenia. Both of them are satellite manufacturers. You've probably all been into, or some of you would have been to manufacturers, into the room where these things are made. It's extraordinary. And you know, I was there to talk about Australia and this and that, and they said, look, shut up, Freeland. We want you to talk about, you know, how law is going to react to this technology, this small satellite technology, and how do we react? And it was interesting that Airbus and Thales, at least at this point, have taken different approaches. Maybe one is slightly more caught up in inertia than the other, but Airbus was involved on the Airbus facility in Toulouse. Is the part of the OneWeb facility, which is creating the OneWeb satellites, the small sats. And of course, you all know the story now that Intelsat and OneWeb have joined up, whether it's a merger, whether it's an acquisition. You know, I'm a former investment banker. We always say merger, right? There's always someone who takes over someone, and you always know the answer by who's the CEO at the end of the process. But Airbus was very keen that the OneWeb production facility would be on their premises. So they, Airbus, would develop that technology to build these things. And they are building, you probably know this, but I didn't, they are building factory floors of, like, you know, Ford production line. The initial plan was to build, I think it was 1,000, but then after the Intelsat situation, most of that production is moving to Florida, but I think maybe 10, I can't remember now, a small number is still being built on site because Airbus want that technology. They tell me that they want the technology to build one of these things every hour. So you can imagine what that might mean. So there's a positive reaction, whether it makes sense commercially, whether it makes sense industrially, you know, all of those are not for me to comment on, but there's a reaction, they have to react. On the other hand, Thales Alenia, behind on that, really don't know what to do. Really don't know what to do. But times are tough. There are fewer, the market for large satellites last year was quite low, apparently, and it's becoming more and more competitive anyway. So, you know, they have to react. So we know there's going to be lots of these things happening. At the international level, there's essentially no law, apart from these guidelines that I pointed to. But I just sat on CUBESAT, and every year for the last 3 or 4 years, on the agenda, because CUBESAT has, you know, the words are very carefully calibrated as to agenda items, general exchange of views on the application of international law to small satellites. And that's what it is. And so we spent a lot of time developing within CUBESAT, through the working group, developing a questionnaire which will be circulated to government. So Mark, it'll probably land on Mark's desk at some point, not too soon, Mark, so you've got plenty of time. Seeking information about what countries are doing, and countries can decide whether or not to respond, whether or not to take it seriously, whatever. But the process at this international level will move in terms of really focusing on hard and fast guidelines, you know, strict guidelines, will move at a snail's pace. We do have the IADC and UN debris mitigation guidelines, which are great, but I'm sure you've all read them. They're really common sense. You know, you shall build your satellite so that it doesn't fall apart. You know, you shall end your satellite's life in a way that doesn't collide with others. I mean, of course you'll do that, and of course that makes sense, but there's not a lot of going on. So in the end, it's up to countries to deal with this, because in a country like Australia, it's clear from the review process, the vast preponderance of newish activities that are happening in Australia, or are proposed in Australia, at least in terms of the review. And you must remember, I submitted my report, August last year, so it's a long time ago, and the submissions had to be in by about April. So those submissions are already a year old, so things may have changed. But at the time, the vast number of submissions made it clear that small satellites were an integral part of this Australian space industrial landscape, going forward on a commercial basis. It's not going to usurp Optus, and it's not going to usurp NBN and maybe some other players, but it's certainly going to be an integral part. And so, obviously, all of that led to the review and the reform, And in the end, and if you haven't, I commend you to this wonderful piece of literature. I spent so bloody long writing it. Please, at least look at it. Yeah, you can then use it as a doorstop, right? But thank you, Helen, for your kind words about it as well. And that's available if you email Mark. He will send it to you. I don't actually know why it's not on the website, but anyway, that's the process that it is. And obviously, Mark has referred you to the reform process as is stated there. So we're going through that. The issue then becomes a balancing issue that Mark quite correctly said. And this is not rocket science, it's stating the bleeding obvious. But the bleeding obvious is everything is a balance. This liability, the international framework is not going to change anytime soon. Not in my lifetime. Well, no, that's probably, hopefully, but certainly not in the foreseeable future. The international framework is not going to change. Everybody talks about the guidelines. They're important. They are the quote-unquote internationally recognised standards. It's as good as we've got at that international level. Australia has made reference to and adhered in a non-binding way, of course, to these guidelines in the, and I'm sorry for mentioning it because it's sort of not a document that is mentioned very much nowadays, but you remember the satellite utilisation policy. It made reference to the debris mitigation guidelines, as did, although it doesn't exist now, for a period of time, one of the, I forget the words, but one of the bits of information that Mark and his colleagues required, I don't think they do it now, for overseas launch certificates, included reference to this in terms of what sort of strategies do you have to adhere to this. I don't think that exists anymore. So we've got this balance, nothing changes. Obviously, if, and it's clearly the case with government, although I don't speak for government, but if we are to develop this industry in a really viable commercial way, I mean, science is wonderful, we're the best in the world at science, but I'm not a government person, but I know government wants us, says we're bloody good at science, let's convert science to money. And so if that is the case, then clearly one needs to have enabling rules. And that's what Mark is trying to do. Really, they genuinely want to help. But they have this counterbalance all the time. The liability issues are not going to go away. Of course, risks are minimal, as most of the submissions have made clear. But you've got to remember, for example, that at least on 3 occasions, the astronauts on the International Space Station were asked to sit in their escape capsule because debris was nearby. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that was small satellites, but, and I know it's not going to happen with the QB50 ones, which are obviously going to be released at a much lower altitude. But if we're sending up, hundreds and thousands of these things, sometimes we don't know. Now, so you've got this balance. The really important thing for me in this, and of course we're all sympathetic, we want this to succeed, because if it doesn't succeed here, it'll succeed elsewhere, and we miss out anyway. But you can't give a free ride. You can't say, you can't encourage, if not bad behaviour, but you can't encourage behaviour that is not up to standard. And so I've argued strongly in the review that, yes, let's make it enabling and all that, but let's include as part of the deal for licenses, where it's appropriate, some requirements for applicants to say, well, how am I going to adhere to the guidelines? 1 minute, thank you. I just want to mention, just on another topic in my last remaining minute, because Donna can't wait. She's dying to, yeah. But just let me mention New Zealand, because I think Donna, people will be interested. So separately, I have the privilege of working with the New Zealand government now. As you all know, the New Zealand government is reacting to this amazing opportunity for them, which is Rocket Lab. Everybody in the room, I'm sure, is aware of Rocket Lab. And I'm told, I was with the New Zealanders for a long time, Indiana just now, I'm told that finally, after many delays, the first test launch is imminent. I don't know what imminent means, but I'm told we're almost there. So they have a draft bill. What's the name of that draft bill?
New Zealand Space Activities Act.
No. It's called the Space and High Altitude Activities Act. Okay? Here is the future, ladies and gentlemen. Mark was talking about the jurisdictional issues, what happens if it goes to 90 kilometres, etc., etc. As the technology happens, as Elias and his amazing people do all this technology into high altitude, we need to start thinking about that. New Zealand is introducing into its bill, it's still a bill, not only payload licenses and launch licenses, etc., but a high altitude payload license. And they've demarcated what they mean by high altitude. I've encouraged them, of course they wouldn't do it, right? I encouraged them to define outer space because, you know, wouldn't that be great, right? They didn't do that, but they defined high altitude, which is above, you can see in the draft bill, it's above controlled airspace, and there's some technical definition. So that is the future. The world is watching New Zealand to see how that works. And there she goes. I have to put up with that all the time. Anyway, I'm more than happy to share my thoughts on that later. But thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
That made my day, didn't it?
Our next and final speaker, brackets S, standing between us and a dream, like it's a tough